Maya Williams walked through the heavy wooden doors of prestigious arts academy with her head held high, but her stomach churned with nervous energy. At 15 years old, she had dreamed of this moment for years. The scholarship letter in her backpack felt like a golden ticket, but the stares from other students made her feel like she was wearing a neon sign that read, "Different." The academy's marble floors echoed with the sound of her worn sneakers as she made her way to the main office. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, and oil paintings of famous composers lined the walls. Everything screamed wealth and tradition. Maya had never seen anything like it in her neighborhood school back in Oakland. "You must be our scholarship student," said Mrs. Henderson, the secretary, with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Mr. Davidson will be your piano instructor. He's been teaching here for 25 years. Maya nodded and followed Mrs. Henderson down a long hallway lined with practice rooms. Through the glass windows, she could see students playing various instruments. Most of them had the same look: expensive clothes, perfect posture, and an air of belonging that Maya envied. The piano department was located in the east wing of the building. Mrs. Henderson knocked on a door marked Professor Richard Davidson and waited for permission to enter. A gruff voice called out, "Come in." Mr. Davidson sat behind an enormous desk covered with sheet music and coffee stains. He was a tall, thin man with gray hair slicked back and wire-rimmed glasses perched on his nose. When he looked up at Maya, his expression changed from mild interest to something that looked like disappointment. "So you're the Williams girl," he said, not bothering to stand up or extend his hand. "I've read your application. Says here you're self-taught?" Maya straightened her shoulders. "Yes, sir. I've been playing since I was 7. My grandmother taught me the basics, and I learned the rest from YouTube videos and library books." Mr. Davidson made a sound that might have been a laugh, but there was no humor in it. "YouTube videos, how modern." He finally stood up, towering over Maya's small frame. "Well, Miss Williams, let me explain how things work here at prestigious arts academy. We have standards. We have traditions. We have a reputation to maintain." He walked around his desk and gestured for Maya to follow him. They entered a large room filled with grand pianos. The afternoon sunlight streamed through tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished floor. Several students were practicing, their fingers dancing across the keys with practiced precision. "These students," Mr. Davidson said, sweeping his arm toward the room, "have been studying classical piano since they could walk. Their parents invest thousands of dollars in private lessons. They attend summer conservatories in Europe. They live and breathe music." Maya felt her confidence shrinking with every word. She knew she was different from these students, but hearing it stated so plainly made her question whether she belonged here at all. "However," Mr. Davidson continued, his voice taking on a patronizing tone, "the Academy believes in diversity, so here you are." He led her to a piano in the corner of the room, older and more worn than the others. "This will be your instrument for the semester." Maya sat down on the bench and placed her hands on the keys. They felt familiar and comforting, like greeting an old friend. She had been playing her grandmother's old upright piano for years, and while it was nothing like these grand pianos, the basics were the same. "What piece would you like me to play?" Maya asked, looking up at Mr. Davidson. He smiled, but there was something cold about it. "Oh, I think we should start with something simple. Perhaps Mary Had a Little Lamb? Or maybe Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star?" The other students in the room had stopped playing and were now watching the interaction with interest. Maya felt heat rise in her cheeks as she realized what was happening. Mr. Davidson was trying to humiliate her in front of everyone. "I was hoping to play something more challenging," Maya said quietly, trying to keep her voice steady. "Miss Williams," Mr. Davidson said, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear, "I think it's important that we assess your skill level accurately. These other students have been preparing for their auditions for months. They've mastered pieces by Bach, Chopin, and Mozart. I think nursery rhymes are more appropriate for your background." Maya's hands trembled slightly as she placed them on the keys. She could feel every eye in the room on her. Some students were smirking, others looked uncomfortable, but none of them spoke up. The silence was deafening. She began to play Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, as requested, but something rebellious stirred inside her. After finishing the simple melody, instead of stopping, she began to improvise. Her fingers found their way into a jazz variation of the tune, adding complex harmonies and syncopated rhythms that transformed the nursery rhyme into something entirely different. The room fell silent except for the sound of Maya's playing. Her hands moved with confidence across the keys, drawing from years of listening to her grandmother's old records and countless hours of practice. She incorporated elements of blues, gospel, and classical music, creating something uniquely her own. When she finished, the silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. Maya looked up to find Mr. Davidson staring at her with an unreadable expression. The other students exchanged glances, some looking impressed despite themselves. "Interesting," Mr. Davidson said finally, his voice carefully controlled. "But this is a classical music program, Miss Williams. We don't encourage creative interpretation here. We focus on technical precision and adherence to the composer's intentions." Maya felt her heart sink. Everything she loved about music, the freedom to express herself, the ability to make something new from something old, was apparently wrong here. "For your first assignment," Mr. Davidson continued, pulling a piece of sheet music from a nearby stand, "you will learn this batch invention. I expect you to play it exactly as written, with no embellishments or personal touches. Can you read music, or will that be another challenge we need to address?" "I can read music," Maya said, taking the sheet music. She had taught herself using online tutorials and library books, and while she wasn't as fast as students who had formal training, she could manage. "Good, you have 1 week to prepare. We'll have a small recital where each student will perform for the class. I trust you'll stick to the written notes this time." Maya nodded and gathered her things. As she left the piano room, she could hear the whispers starting behind her. She walked quickly down the hallway, her face burning with embarrassment and anger. In the bathroom, Maya stared at herself in the mirror. Her reflection looked small and out of place in the ornate surroundings. She thought about her grandmother, who had worked 2 jobs to buy that old upright piano and had spent countless evenings teaching Maya to play by ear. She thought about her mother, who had been so proud when the scholarship letter arrived. Maya pulled out her phone and found a quiet corner where she could call home. Her mother answered on the second ring. "Maya? How was your first day? Are you loving it?" Maya wanted to tell her mother everything about Mr. Davidson's condescending attitude, about feeling like an outsider, about the way the other students looked at her. But she could hear the hope and pride in her mother's voice, and she couldn't bring herself to disappoint her. "It's different," Maya said carefully. "The school is really fancy, and the teachers have high standards." "That's wonderful, baby. I knew you'd fit right in. Your talent is going to shine there." After hanging up, Maya made her way to the library to study the batch piece. She found a quiet corner and spread the sheet music on the table. The notes looked simple enough, but she knew Mr. Davidson would be watching for any sign of creative interpretation. As she studied the music, Maya began to understand what Mr. Davidson meant about technical precision. Every note had its place, every rest had its purpose. There was a mathematical beauty to Batch's compositions that she had never fully appreciated before. But there was also something restrictive about it, like being asked to paint a picture using only one color over the next few days. Maya threw herself into practicing the Batch invention. She spent hours in the practice rooms, playing the piece over and over until her fingers ached. She focused on precision, timing, and dynamics, trying to suppress every instinct to add her own musical voice to the composition. The other students in her class were polite, but distant. During lunch, Maya often sat alone, watching groups of friends who had known each other for years. She overheard conversations about expensive instruments, private tutors and summer programs in prestigious conservatories. The casual way they talked about spending thousands of dollars on music lessons made Maya acutely aware of how different her background was. Jennifer Chun, a petite girl with perfectly straight black hair, was particularly intimidating. She played Chopin's most difficult pieces with effortless grace, and had already been accepted to several summer programs at top conservatories. During class, she would sometimes glance at Maya with barely concealed pity. "I heard she learned to play from YouTube," Maya overheard Jennifer whisper to another student. "Can you imagine?" Maya pretended not to hear, but the words stung. She had worked so hard to get here, had sacrificed so much, and yet she felt like she was constantly being reminded that she did. Mr. Davidson walked slowly around the piano, his footsteps echoing in the silent recital hall. Maya remained seated on the bench, her hands still resting on the keys, waiting for his evaluation. The other students watched with a mixture of curiosity and discomfort as their teacher prepared to deliver his assessment. "Miss Williams," Mr. Davidson began, his voice carrying across the room, "your performance today perfectly illustrates the challenges facing this institution when we lower our admission standards." Several students shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Maya felt her face grow hot, but she forced herself to maintain eye contact. "While you managed to hit most of the correct notes," he continued, "your playing lacks the sophistication and musical understanding that we expect from our students. There's a difference between playing notes and making music, and I'm afraid you haven't grasped that distinction yet." Maya wanted to respond, to defend herself, but her voice seemed trapped in her throat. She had practiced that piece until her fingers ached, had studied every marking on the sheet music, had given everything she had to meet his standards. "Furthermore," Mr. Davidson said, turning to address the entire class, "this performance highlights why we maintain such rigorous admission standards. Music education cannot be rushed or improvised. It requires years of proper foundation, something that YouTube tutorials simply cannot provide." Jennifer Chun raised her hand tentatively. "Mr. Davidson, should we continue with the other performances?" "Yes, of course," he replied, but his attention remained focused on Maya. "Miss Williams, you may return to your seat. I think we've learned what we needed to know about your current skill level." Maya stood up from the piano bench on shaking legs. As she walked back to her seat, she could feel every eye in the room following her. Some students looked sympathetic, others appeared relieved that they weren't in her position. The remainder of the recital passed in a blur as Maya struggled to process what had just happened. After class, Maya gathered her things quickly, hoping to escape before anyone could offer false sympathy or ask uncomfortable questions. But as she reached the door, Jennifer Chun caught up with her. "Maya, wait," Jennifer said softly. "I just wanted to say that I thought you played really well. That batch piece is actually harder than it sounds." Maya looked at Jennifer with surprise. Throughout the week, Jennifer had seemed so confident and intimidating, but now her expression was kind, almost apologetic. "Thanks," Maya mumbled, not trusting herself to say more without crying. "Mr. Davidson can be really harsh sometimes," Jennifer continued. "He gave me a similar speech when I first started here 2 years ago. He told my parents I would never amount to anything because my technique was too rigid." Maya stopped walking and turned to face Jennifer fully. "Really?" "Really. My parents wanted to transfer me to another school, but I was determined to prove him wrong. It took me almost a year to earn his respect." Jennifer hesitated, then added, "But what he did to you today was different. That wasn't constructive criticism. That was just mean." Maya felt a mix of gratitude and confusion. If someone like Jennifer, who seemed to have everything together, had also struggled with Mr. Davidson, maybe Maya's experience wasn't entirely about her own shortcomings. "The thing is," Jennifer said, lowering her voice, "I've heard you practicing in the evenings when I stay late for orchestra rehearsal. When you think no one is listening, you play with so much soul. You have something that most of us here don't have." Maya stared at Jennifer in shock. "You've been listening to me practice?" "The walls aren't as soundproof as they pretend," Jennifer smiled. "That jazz arrangement you did of Twinkle, Twinkle on the first day was incredible. I've never heard anyone make a nursery rhyme sound so sophisticated." For the first time since arriving at the academy, Maya felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe she did belong here, even if Mr. Davidson couldn't see it. That evening, Maya called her grandmother again. This time, instead of complaining about her struggles, she told her about Jennifer's unexpected kindness and encouragement. "See, baby girl," her grandmother said, "real recognizes real. That Jennifer girl knows talent when she hears it, even if your teacher is too stubborn to admit it." "But what if Mr. Davidson is right?" Maya asked. "What if I really don't have the proper foundation? What if I'm just fooling myself?" "Maya Williams," her grandmother said firmly, "you've been making music since you were 7 years old. Not playing exercises, not copying other people's ideas, but creating something beautiful and original. Don't let one bitter old man convince you that your gift isn't real." The conversation gave Maya renewed determination. The next day, she arrived at school early and headed straight to the practice rooms. Instead of working on assigned pieces, she sat down and began to play from her heart. She started with a simple melody, then began to build layers of harmony and rhythm. Her hands moved freely across the keys, drawing from every musical influence she had absorbed over the years. As she played, Maya felt herself relaxing for the first time since arriving at the academy. This was who she was as a musician. Not someone trying to mimic other people's interpretations, but an artist with her own voice and style. "That's beautiful," came a voice from behind her. Maya turned to see Marcus Washington, the tall senior who had performed the Mozart sonata so brilliantly the day before. "What piece is that?" "It's not a piece," Maya said, suddenly self-conscious. "I was just improvising." Marcus's eyes widened. "You made that up on the spot? That's incredible. I couldn't improvise like that if my life depended on it." "Really?" Maya found it hard to believe that someone with Marcus's obvious skill couldn't improvise. "Really," Marcus laughed. "I can play anything you put in front of me, but ask me to create something original and I freeze up completely. My parents have had me in lessons since I was 4, but every single thing I play comes from sheet music." Maya had never considered that formal training might have disadvantages. To her, students like Marcus seemed to have every advantage possible. "The thing is," Marcus continued, sitting down on a nearby chair, "what Mr. Davidson did to you yesterday was wrong. A lot of us were uncomfortable with it, but we didn't know what to say. Why didn't anyone speak up?" Maya asked, genuinely curious rather than accusatory. Marcus looked uncomfortable. "Because he has so much power here. He can make or break your chances of getting into good conservatories. Most of us are terrified of getting on his bad side." Maya nodded, beginning to understand the complex dynamics at play. These students might have more training and financial advantages, but they were also trapped by expectations and fear in ways she had never considered over the next few weeks. Maya began to find her place at the academy. She discovered that while Mr. Davidson's classes were challenging and often demoralizing, there were other teachers who appreciated different aspects of musical education. Miss Rodriguez, the jazz piano instructor, was particularly encouraging. "You have incredible natural instincts," Ms. Rodriguez told Maya after hearing her play. "Many of my students struggle for years to develop the rhythmic sense that comes naturally to you." Maya also began spending time with Jennifer and Marcus outside of class. They formed an unlikely study group, helping each other with different aspects of their musical education. Jennifer helped Maya with sight reading and classical technique, while Maya showed them how to incorporate improvisation and personal expression into their playing. However, Mr. Davidson's attitude toward Maya didn't improve. If anything, he seemed to take her growing confidence as a personal challenge. He began assigning her increasingly difficult pieces with impossibly short deadlines, then criticizing her performance in front of the entire class when she inevitably struggled. "Miss Williams," he announced after one particularly brutal critique, "I'm beginning to think that this program may be too advanced for someone with your background. Perhaps you should consider transferring to a less demanding school." Maya felt the familiar sting of his words, but this time she didn't let them crush her spirit. She had learned too much about herself and her abilities to let one person's opinion define her worth. "Mr. Davidson," Maya said, surprising herself with the steadiness of her voice, "I'd like to request permission to perform an additional piece at the next recital." The room fell silent. Students rarely challenged Mr. Davidson's authority, and Maya's request was clearly outside normal protocol. "I beg your pardon?" Mr. Davidson said, his eyebrows raised in surprise. "You assigned me Chopin's Minuet Waltz for next week's recital," Maya continued, her confidence growing with each word. "I'd like permission to perform an additional piece that showcases a different aspect of my musical education." Mr. Davidson's expression shifted from surprise to something that looked almost predatory. "Miss Williams, the Chopin piece alone will be challenging enough for someone at your skill level. I hardly think adding another piece would be wise." "With respect, sir, I believe I can handle it," Maya said. "I've been practicing the Chopin piece for 3 weeks, and I feel confident in my preparation." Several students exchanged glances. Maya was treading into dangerous territory, but there was something admirable about her willingness to stand up for herself. Mr. Davidson walked slowly toward Maya's desk, his expression unreadable. "What additional piece did you have in mind?" Maya took a deep pull. The recital hall buzzed with nervous energy as students and faculty members took their seats. Maya sat in the front row, her hands folded in her lap to hide their slight trembling. She had performed the Chopin Minuet Waltz dozens of times in practice, but today it felt like everything depended on these next few minutes. Mr. Davidson stood at the front of the room, reviewing his program notes with obvious satisfaction. Maya was scheduled to perform last, a position that traditionally went to the most advanced students. She suspected he had arranged it this way to maximize her potential embarrassment in front of the entire department. "Today's recital features some challenging repertoire," Mr. Davidson announced to the assembled audience. "Our students have been working diligently to master these pieces, and I think you'll find their progress quite illuminating." Maya watched as her classmates performed one by one. Jennifer played a gorgeous Debussy piece with her characteristic precision and grace. Marcus delivered a powerful interpretation of a Beethoven sonata that left the audience genuinely moved. Each performance was polished and impressive, the result of years of dedicated study and expert instruction. As Maya's turn approached, she felt her heart rate increase. She closed her eyes and thought about her grandmother, about the countless hours they had spent together at that old upright piano, about the joy and freedom she felt when music flowed through her fingers without judgment or criticism. "Our final performer today is Maya Williams," Mr. Davidson announced, his voice betraying nothing of their recent confrontation. "Miss Williams will be performing Chopin's Minuet Waltz, followed by an original composition." Maya stood up and walked to the piano bench, acutely aware of every eye in the room following her movement. She adjusted the bench height, took a deep breath, and placed her hands on the keys. The opening notes of the Chopin piece flowed from the piano with crystalline clarity. Maya had practiced this waltz until every phrase was deeply embedded in her muscle memory, but today she felt something different. Instead of simply reproducing the notes on the page, she found herself connecting with the emotional content of the music. Her fingers danced across the keys with increasing confidence, navigating the technical challenges that had seemed impossible just weeks ago. The famous rapid passages that gave the piece its nickname sparkled with precision, while the more lyrical sections sang with genuine expression. As she played, Maya became aware of a shift in the room's atmosphere. The polite attention that had characterized earlier performances had transformed into something more engaged and focused. She could feel the audience leaning forward, drawn into her interpretation of this familiar piece. When the final notes faded away, there was a moment of absolute silence before the audience erupted in applause. Maya looked up to see faces filled with genuine appreciation and surprise. Even Mr. Davidson appeared momentarily taken aback by the quality of her performance, but Maya knew this was only the beginning. The real test was yet to come. She waited for the applause to die down, then turned to address the audience directly. "The piece I'm about to perform is called Finding My Voice," she said, her words carrying clearly through the hall. "It's a musical reflection on my journey to understand what it means to be an artist." Mr. Davidson's expression tightened at this deviation from normal protocol. But Maya had committed herself to this path, and there was no turning back. She placed her hands on the keys again. But this time the music that emerged was entirely her own. The piece began quietly, with a simple melody that echoed the spiritual songs her grandmother had hummed while cooking dinner. The left hand provided a steady, grounding bass line while the right hand explored variations on the theme. Gradually, the music began to evolve and expand. Maya incorporated jazz harmonies that reflected her neighborhood's rich musical heritage, weaving them seamlessly with classical structures she had learned at the academy. The piece told a story of struggle and growth, of finding beauty in unexpected places, of refusing to be silenced or diminished. As the composition progressed, Maya felt herself entering a state of complete musical flow. Every note felt necessary and inevitable, every phrase building toward something larger than herself. She drew from every musical influence that had shaped her: gospel chords from Sunday morning services, classical techniques learned through painstaking practice, blues progressions that spoke to experiences of hardship and resilience. The piece reached its climax with a soaring melodic line that seemed to fill every corner of the recital hall. Maya's hands moved with complete confidence across the keyboard, no longer bound by self-doubt or fear of judgment. This was who she was as a musician, not a pale imitation of someone else's idea of classical music, but a unique voice that had something important to say. As the final notes died away, the silence in the room was profound and complete. Maya kept her hands on the keys for a moment, reluctant to break the spell that had settled over the audience. When she finally looked up, she saw faces transformed by what they had just experienced. Jennifer was openly crying, her usual composure completely abandoned. Marcus sat with his mouth slightly open, as if he couldn't quite believe what he had heard. Other students and faculty members looked similarly moved, their expressions ranging from wonder to amazement, but Maya's attention was focused on Mr. Davidson. For the first time since she had known him, his carefully controlled facade had cracked. He stood frozen at the front of the room, his face cycling through a range of emotions: surprise, confusion, and something that might have been recognition. The silence stretched for what felt like minutes, before a single person began to clap. It was Dr. Sarah Chun, the Academy's director, who had slipped into the back of the room during Maya's performance. Her applause was joined by others, building into sustained ovation that seemed to shake the very foundations of the building. Maya stood up from the piano bench on unsteady legs, overwhelmed by the response to her music. As the applause continued, she saw students and faculty members rising to their feet, their faces glowing with genuine appreciation and respect. When the ovation finally died down, Dr. Chen made her way to the front of the room. "Miss Williams," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the hall. "That was extraordinary. In 30 years of music education, I have rarely heard a performance that so perfectly captured the essence of what we're trying to teach here: technical excellence in service of genuine artistic expression." Maya felt tears pricking at her eyes, but she managed to maintain her composure. "Thank you, Dr. Chun. Music has always been my way of making sense of the world." Dr. Chun turned to address the entire room. "This performance reminds us why we're all here, not just to preserve musical traditions, but to nurture new voices that will carry music forward into the future." Mr. Davidson remained silent throughout this exchange, his expression unreadable. As students and faculty members began to file out of the recital hall, many stopped to congratulate Maya on her performance. Jennifer hugged her tightly, whispering, "That was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard." Marcus shook her hand formally, then broke into a wide grin. "I'm going to have to completely rethink how I approach music," he said. "You just showed us all what it means to have something to say." As the crowd thinned out, Maya found herself alone in the recital hall with Mr. Davidson. He stood near the piano, apparently deep in thought. For several minutes, neither of them spoke. Finally, Mr. Davidson cleared his throat. "Miss Williams," he said, his voice lacking its usual sharp edge, "that was unexpected." Maya waited, unsure what response was appropriate. This was not the same man who had tried to humiliate her just weeks ago, but she wasn't sure who he was now. "I owe you an apology," Mr. Davidson continued, the words seeming to cost him considerable effort. When you arrived here, I made assumptions based on your background rather than your potential. That was unprofessional and unfair. Maya felt a mixture of vindication and sadness. She had proven her point, but at such great cost to her confidence and sense of belonging. Your performance today demonstrated something I had forgotten, Mr. Davidson said, sitting down heavily in one of the audience chairs. Technical skill without soul is just noise. But soul without technical skill is just unfulfilled potential. You've somehow managed to develop both, despite my best efforts to discourage you. I had a lot of help, Maya said quietly. From my grandmother, from my new friends here, from teachers who believed in me. Mr. Davidson nodded slowly. And you had something I can't teach, a genuine need to express yourself through music. That's the difference between students who become competent musicians and those who become artists. He stood up and walked toward the door, then turned back to face Maya one more time. I hope you'll continue in the program, Miss Williams. I think I might actually learn something from having you in my classes. After he left, Maya sat alone in the recital hall for several minutes, processing everything that had happened. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. Dad and I are so proud of you. Can't wait to hear all about your recital. Maya smiled and typed back. It went better than I ever imagined. I think I'm finally finding where I belong. Over the following weeks, Maya's relationship with the Academy transformed completely. Mr. Davidson will